Hi! I'm Melissa Case from Hat to Hem, and today I'm getting creative. Like so many others, I have watched Bridgerton, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I originally felt a little meh towards it when I saw promotional images, but my husband popped it on, and once I got past that corset scene, I found myself loving the creative take on the costumes. I really enjoy when costume designers think outside the box when it comes to their choices, especially if the story is set in an alternate universe, or if it has an over-the-top tone that allows for some fun. Bridgerton checks both of those boxes, so the costume designers can do whatever they want, and the only thing I'll complain about is tight lacing and chemiseless chafing. Naturally, I wanted in on the fun, so I decided to make a Bridgerton-inspired dress. Of course, I can't do anything the easy way, so I decided to give myself a challenge. Number 1, the only materials for this dress would have to come from my stash. I wasn't going to go to a single store or buy anything. And number 2, I had to make this costume in the time it took to rewatch Bridgerton. That would give me a little over 8 hours spread out across 8 episodes. So, materials. This embroidered sequency pink fabric was what originally inspired me to go ahead with this. I thought it screamed Featherington. However, I realized pretty soon that I didn't have enough for a full gown, and I didn't really have anything to go under it, and I would definitely need something to go under it. Plan B had me move across the street within the show to the Bridgerton family. I was able to unearth this robin eggs blue fabric that I thought might work. However, I also didn't have enough yardage. Luckily, I have this fabric that's a similar shade and, true to the show's style, it's covered in little sparkly bits. The plan was then to have this be a colored petticoat and then make the dress itself out of these sheer white curtains. There is a lot of fabric layering going on in this show, and I've wanted to play with the white dress bright petticoat combination ever since I watched Emma 2020. With my fabrics assembled, it was time to get started. Luckily, I was able to use the same petticoat bodice pattern from the Regency petticoat I made for Halloween. When you only have 8 hours, every bit counts. I decided to add lining a cotton twill to the bodice to give it a little more structure. I also decided this fabric was just a little too flimsy, so I added an interlining of cotton muslin. You can really see what a difference it made. Slightly diagonal boning channels were added to the side front pieces before the whole bodice was assembled. Of course, I then remembered that I was supposed to leave the side seams unsewn for now, so out came the seam ripper. In order to control the neckline of the petticoat, I clipped a strip of bias tape around the neckline, then sewed the bottom edge to the lining. I probably should have used a narrower tape here, but oh well. This was what I had on hand. The top edge was then sandwiched between the lining and the fashion fabric, saving me from having to do an extra step. The arm side was also sewn up here, which would lead to some regrets during the next step. I had to squeeze the entire back half of the bodice through the tiny arm strap. I wasted a lot of valuable time as I tried everything I could think of to get the fabric through. Eventually, I turned back to my seam ripper. A small opening to relieve the tension did the trick. I was able to stitch up the opening by hand in no time. Luckily, I hadn't sewn the other arm side yet, so I was able to include a small opening in the strap. Now is when the side seam was supposed to be sewn up. The side seams from the fashion fabric and the lining are both finished in a single move, which always kinda delights me. At this point, I was just starting episode 3 of Bridgerton with the petticoat bodice mostly assembled. All that was left was the drawstring along the neckline to control the gaping, and finishing the center back. Because the petticoat skirt would be the same pattern as the skirt itself, I decided to move ahead and work on the bodice of the dress next. Luckily, I already had the bodice pattern cut out. I stage stitched 1/4 of an inch from the neckline per the pattern instructions, and sewed 2 rows of gathering stitches between the notches at the bottom of the front pieces. Like the petticoat bodice, the shoulder straps were sewn before the side seams. Because I'm not lining the dress bodice to keep it at maximum sheerness, I decided to use French seams to minimize fraying. I do think I made the shoulder seams too large. I made them 1/4 of an inch smaller for the side seams, and I think it looked a bit better. The next step was to sew a bias strip cut from the fabric along the top edge of the bodice pieces. This will hide the raw edges as well as serve as a channel for the drawstring. I normally would have secured this by hand, but since I was already in episode 4 of Bridgerton, I decided that a shortcut for the sake of my goal was fine. Using a bodkin, which is a pretty large needle with a ball on the end, I was able to bring the drawstring through the channel I made. The drawstring was then secured with some back stitches on my machine. I finished up the side seams, again, using the French seam method, then I turned my attention to the waistband. I backed the waistband with the sparkly fabric. I knew I wanted to serge the seam, but I didn't want it to show through the dress. The opaque fabric will hide it and add a little bit of stability to the waistband. The 2 bodice pieces were clipped on, overlapping in the front. Any excess was taken care of by the gathering stitches I had sewn earlier. Around 40 minutes into episode 4, I started working on the sleeves. The tops of these sleeves are pleated. I like to use colored pins, matching the same colors together. It really helps take away any guesswork, which speeds up the process. I also match colored pins whenever I need to gather a piece of fabric to match the length of another piece. In this case, I'm matching the bottom of the sleeve to the sleeve band, with green pins at the 1/4 marks, yellow pins at the center marks, and red pins at the 3/4 marks. The pins are matched and the fabric gathered, with each section having more or less the same amount of fabric as the others. The sleeve band was folded up, pressed, and stitched in place. The sleeves were sewn on just in time for the wedding of... whoops! Spoilers! Time for the skirts. I actually didn't use a pattern for the skirts of the dress and petticoat because they're just made up of rectangles. Instead, I measured the panels of the petticoat I already had and cut out the new petticoat and skirt based on those measurements. For the new petticoat, I cut the front and back panels out of the sparkly fabric and the side panels out of the plain fabric because I didn't have enough of either to make a full skirt. Now for the placket. The placket is a little interesting in this case because there's no center back seam. This placket is one long piece of fabric that's folded in half. A slit that matches the length of the folded placket is then cut down the center back of the back panel. I put a dot of fray check on the bottom of the slit to reinforce that spot. Once it was dry, I stitched the placket to the slit by opening the slit out so it was in a straight line. I didn't get footage of how it was laid flat. I might just do a tutorial for this placket method in the future so you have a clearer view of what I'm doing. Once the placket is in, the skirt panels are sewn together and pressed. Next, I loosened the tension on my machine and lengthened the stitch length so I could sew the gathering stitches along the waistline. Before I could attach the skirt, I needed to finish up the bodice. I serged the seam where the waistband meets the bodice. Then I poked a hole in the drawstring channel since the center back of the bodice wouldn't allow for the drawstring to be functional. Normally, I would have finished off the eyelet by hand, but I left it raw for the sake of time, especially since I'm not planning to wear this gown often. Once the center back was folded over and finished off camera for some reason, it was time to gather the skirt to the bodice. Again, using my colored pins to regulate how much fabric went into each section. The skirt of the dress and petticoat were attached to the bodices and hemmed. Now for my favorite part, trim. I opted for purple artificial flowers. My idea was to try and give a nod to the beautiful wisteria adoring the Bridgerton's family home. Even though just tacking on a full stem would have been faster, it was bulkier than I wanted. Instead, I removed the blooms from the artificial wisteria I had. I also removed the blooms from another stem of flowers whose petals were similar to the wisteria, but were a darker purple mixed with green, which I mixed in with the wisteria for some more color variants. Each bloom was then individually pinned onto the bodice. I used a different flower to represent the little buds at the end of each stem. Each flower was then sewn on with a bead in the center. It's Bridgerton. You need to have a little bit of glitz. Luckily, I was able to sit and enjoy the final episode of Bridgerton while I attached the flowers. Amazingly, the last thread was snipped just as the final episode ended. And that's it! I'm so happy with this dress, and I can't believe I finished it in around 8 hours. I'll admit, those hours were not consecutive. This dress ended up taking around 5 days to make. Still, I think that's pretty good. It was surprisingly liberating to make a historically inspired costume that didn't need to follow the rules when it came to fabrics or construction. It was a fun challenge, and I'm really glad I did this. If this inspires you to make your own Bridgerton dress, please let me know and tag me on Instagram or Facebook so I can see what you've made. I hope you enjoyed this challenge as much as I did. If you did, feel free to like this video and leave a comment. If you really liked this video and you're new to my channel, I hope you'll subscribe because I have a lot of exciting content lined up for this year. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye!